Welcome to ETRO Construction. At our core, we are builders. Builders who are committed to doing things differently. Safety at ETRO means we place the health, well-being, and safety of every individual we partner with above anything else through means of education, insight, and training. Project information. Project personnel. In the event that a worker has questions regarding any aspect on a job, it is important for workers to become familiar with ETRO's on-site superintendent, supervisor, first aid attendant, or safety coordinator. Project address, hospital and medical clinic locations. Your project address, as well as the nearest hospital and medical clinic, can also be found on the project information board located on site. Emergency response plan. Site-specific emergency exits, muster points, locations of nearest fire extinguishers and air horns, or how to summons help must be discussed with your foreman or an ETRO supervisor prior to starting to work. First aid location and personnel. It is important that all injuries be reported to first aid regardless of how small or insignificant they may seem. The location of first aid will be discussed with an ETRO supervisor after this video. ETRO's first aid attendant will provide necessary treatment for injuries that occur on site. They will then decide whether or not a worker is able to return to work or requires further medical treatment. Medical, fire, and evacuation procedures. Located throughout the job site are orange emergency boxes. Please be aware of their locations in correspondence to your areas of work on site. The emergency boxes include 1 fire extinguisher and 1 emergency air horn. The air horn is to only be used in the event of an emergency. 3 short blasts summons medical aid in the event of a medical emergency. If there is uncertainty if help is arriving, keep blasting the air horn in increments of 3 or call the personnel listed on top of the emergency box. 1 long blast is to initiate a site evacuation. Once sounded, workers will promptly gather to the designated muster point where an ETRO supervisor will then take over. Fire extinguisher operations. Pass. Muster point. A muster point is a designated safe location where, in the event of an emergency or site evacuation, workers can gather safely to receive further instruction by an ETRO supervisor. Site-specific muster point locations will be discussed later on in this orientation. Hypodermic needles. If hypodermic needles are found on or near the construction site, do not touch them. Notify an ETRO representative as soon as possible. Project safety rules. Project rules. All workers must abide by the following site rules. All visitors must report to the site office and complete a safety orientation. Hard hats, high visibility vests, and safety footwear must be worn at all times. Possession or impairment by alcohol or drugs is strictly prohibited and will result in immediate removal from site. All accidents and injuries must be immediately reported to the supervisor. All work shall be carried out in accordance with appropriate safe work practices and procedures. Fighting, horseplay, practical jokes, or otherwise interfering with other workers is prohibited. Theft, vandalism, or any other abuse or misuse of company property is prohibited. Any form of harassment or bullying will not be tolerated and result in immediate removal from site. Smoking and vaping. It is at the discretion of an ETRO supervisor to discuss smoking and vaping on the construction site. Designated smoking locations and limitations will be discussed after this orientation video. Drugs and alcohol. ETRO has zero tolerance towards drugs and alcohol at the workplace. Consumption before, during, or on construction site property is strictly prohibited. Radios, music players, and cell phones. At the discretion of ETRO's on-site supervisor, if any device interferes with the ability to converse on a normal speaking volume, or the ability to hear emergency air horns, or becomes a safety concern, instructions to remove or to turn off the device will be made. Harassment. ETRO will not support any means of harassment on the job site. Compliance and disciplinary action. Under the discretion of an ETRO supervisor, if a worker does not follow site rules, WorkSafe BC regulations, safe work practices, or safe job procedures, he or she will be notified by means of progressive disciplinary actions. Dependent on the severity of the infraction, or if it is a repeat offense, a worker will be either verbally warned, be given a written warning, or sent home with potential permanent ban from site. Personal protective equipment. Clothing. All workers and visitors are expected to wear, at minimum, full-length pants, a shirt with minimum 4-inch sleeves to cover shoulders, both free of any rips or tears. Workers and visitors are advised not to wear loose baggy apparel, tie back long hair, and to hide or remove any loose or hanging jewelry to prevent any entanglement with machinery or tools. Equipment. All workers and visitors are required to wear CSA-approved hard hats, reflective vests, as well as CSA-approved steel-toed boots prior to entering the job site. All workers should inspect their equipment to ensure apparel is in good working order. Eye protection. In the event that a worker has the potential to be exposed to an eye injury, eye protection must be worn. If a worker is exposed to potential further dangers to his or her eyes or face, specialized PPE, such as full face shields, must be used according to manufacturer's recommendations. Hearing conservation. When hazardous noise above 85 decibels are present and cannot be reduced by any other means, employers are responsible for providing appropriate hearing protection, such as earplugs or earmuffs. Workers are responsible for wearing the hearing protection issued to them during times of harmful noise exposure. Respiratory protection. If a worker has the potential to be exposed to any airborne particles, such as dust, solvents, or silica, they are to wear appropriate fitting respirators, have proof of a completed fit test, and be clean-shaven prior to starting work. Safety communication. Project Information Board. This board is to serve all workers with the appropriate information for each site. It consists of information such as site contact info, site logistics plans, directions to hospitals or medical clinics, and inspection reports. Regular workplace inspections. All workers are required to inspect their work area for potential hazards before, during, and after their work has been completed. New hazards should be reported regularly. Safety meetings. It is important that all workers involve themselves in regular weekly safety meetings to promote knowledge, education, and understanding of all safety rules and regulations and to address any current hazards on site. Toolbox meetings. These meetings should be conducted at minimum once per week with all crew members. Once complete, a copy of the Toolbox Talk must be submitted to ETRO staff each week. Safety signage. In the event that safety signage is used to identify hazardous areas, all workers must follow postings. If a worker does not understand the posted signage, they are to immediately contact their supervisor for clarification. Caution and danger tape. Caution tape. Yellow tape to mark out hazardous areas. Workers that put up the tape are responsible to take the tape down. Workers may proceed with caution, but must fully understand the hazards before entering any caution-taped area. Danger tape. Red tape to mark out high hazardous areas to not enter. Workers that put the tape up are responsible to take the tape down. Workers are prohibited to remove or enter areas marked with danger tape. Failure to comply will result in disciplinary actions. Field-level hazard assessments and pre-tasks. All workers are expected to conduct a field-level hazard assessment or pre-task form before commencing work for the day, or if the scope of work activities change. These forms are to be submitted to ETRO staff daily. Last-minute risk assessment. In the event that a scope of work has changed and is outside the worker's normal work activities, A last-minute risk assessment needs to be completed before the task starts. Incident reporting and investigations. If any incident occurs on site, it is mandatory to contact an ETRO site supervisor and an incident report must be completed. This includes and is not limited to property damage, near misses, theft, harassment, or medical aids. Restricted work programs. ETRO supports restricted work and back-to-work programs. In the event of an injury or illness, alternate job duties will be implemented to ensure a worker is able to return to work as quickly as possible. New and young construction workers. Any workers under the age of 25 years old are considered to be young workers. New to construction workers are any workers that do not have prior relevant construction experience. For these two types of workers, it is mandatory that they receive a new or young worker orientation from their employer before they start to work. Modular fencing. If modular fencing or temporary fencing is present on site, it is required that it remains in its original position at all times. All workers are expected to enter and exit the construction site at designated locations. However, if removal or movement of fences are necessary, they must be returned to their original positions as soon as possible. Traffic control. In the event that the construction activity impacts sidewalks, roads, or alleyways, it is important to discuss a plan with an ETRO site supervisor prior to starting work. A traffic control plan, proper signage, and the use of flaggers could all be needed if work activities impact these areas. It is important to note that any worker controlling traffic requires the appropriate PPE as well as training before stepping out in these areas. Housekeeping. All workers are responsible to keep their work areas clean, clear, and well organized. Slips, trips, and falls due to buildup of garbage, debris, and work materials are some of the most common injuries on a construction site. Garbage cans, garbage bins, and other means of collection will be available for workers to use to ensure the construction site stays clean and organized at all times. Electrical safety. ETRO requires all workers to inspect and test their electrical cords to ensure that they are free of any cuts, frays, or areas of deterioration that may compromise the cord. All extension cords are to be tested and labeled accordingly to the assured grounding program ETRO follows. Power tools. ETRO expects all workers to inspect all tools that they work with. Any tools that contain defects or are broken in any way are required to be removed, thrown out, or locked out using appropriate tagging procedures to prevent accidental use that may cause injury. Lockout. If a piece of machinery or electrical panel is needing to be locked out, a lockout procedure must be completed with all members' signatures. This procedure is to ensure all members understand the steps involved in the lockout process and to ensure nobody is able to turn the piece of machinery on during maintenance or servicing. Hidden and underground utilities. Prior to any excavation or ground disturbance, proper procedures need to be implemented. Pre-existing or hidden underground utilities will be located and clearly marked prior to the start of any ground disturbance. Excavations. If an excavation is present on site, it is important to understand the dangers of excavations, trenches, and ground disturbance. If you do not know the hazards around excavation or trenches, speak to your supervisors prior to working in these areas. As soon as any excavation is deeper than 4 feet, support systems must be used to prevent soil movement. Methods such as sloping, benching, grading, or shoring are all common practices. Safe access and egress must be reviewed and used at all times during an excavation. Guardrails or other protective means should be used to surround the perimeter to protect any workers working around an excavation. Trench crossings that are used above 4 feet must have appropriate handrails and be built according to WorkSafe BC regulations. Overhead hazards. Any hazards that may become a conflict such as power lines, trees, other structures must be assessed prior to commencing work. If overhead hazards conflict with potential work being done, a qualified spotter must accompany the work activities. All workers must be aware of scheduled worksite activities to ensure that no overhead work is being completed while they are working below. Any such conflict must be discussed with an ETRO supervisor to determine scheduling and placement of workers. Cranes, rigging, and hoisting. Crane operators must submit proof of qualification and training prior to use of any crane. Duties and responsibilities of the crane operator shall be discussed with ETRO site supervisors prior to commencing work. Rigging and hoisting procedures, as well as inspections, must be reviewed by all workers working in this field of work. A qualified rigger must be used to control any lift on a job site. Fall protection and fall protection plans. Fall protection must be used whenever a worker is at risk of falling 10 feet or more, or where a fall from a lesser height may result in a serious injury. In addition, before workers begin a job, they must be trained in the proper use of fall protection systems they will be using. The hierarchy of fall protection includes adequate guard and handrails, fall restraint systems, fall arrest systems, and safe work procedures, such as control zones and safety monitor systems. When workers are at risk of falling from an elevation that exceeds 25 feet, the employer must have a written fall protection plan in place and available at the workplace before any work is to be done at this elevation. All fall protection equipment must be inspected prior to use. Guardrails. An area accessible to workers must have guardrails installed if there is a potential of a fall greater than 4 feet. All stairwells must contain handrails following WorkSafe BC regulations. Next is a list of minimum standards for guardrails. They must be able to withstand a load of 125 pounds horizontal or vertical downward pressure at any point on the top rail. Vertical posts must be no further than 8 feet apart. Top rails must reach within 40 to 44 inches high, and mid rails must reach within 20 to 22 inches high. Toe boards will be required at the discretion of an ETRO site supervisor. Appropriate fall protection must be worn while installing or removing guardrails. If guardrails are removed, safety signage must be posted to alert all workers on site and until the guardrails are replaced to their original position. Floor and roof openings. If floor or roof openings are present on site, ensure areas are appropriately marked with safety signage or covered adequately to protect any workers from potential falls. Rebar protection. To protect workers from scrapes and impalement, exposed rebar ends must be covered at all times. If exposed rebar is present on site, notify an on-site supervisor to ensure that the protection methods can be initiated and maintained. Ladder and step ladders. Common items to think about before using a ladder. Read all labels and instructions prior to use. Ensure you're using the proper ladder for the proper job. Visually inspect your ladder for any defects or damage. If using an extension ladder, make sure to maintain a 4:1 ratio with the top and bottom of the ladder secured at all times. Allow 3 rungs to extend past the top landing area to provide safe access up and down. If using an A-frame ladder, don't step or stand on the top 2 rungs of this type of ladder. Always maintain 3 points of contact and don't carry heavy loads while ascending or descending. Scaffolding. While erecting, using, and dismantling scaffolding, it is important that a trained or competent worker oversees and inspects this process. If work is to be completed with the use of scaffolding, an inspection prior to use must be completed for each workday to ensure that all applicable parts and components are safe and secure. Elevating work platforms. If a worker is going to be using an elevated work platform, It is necessary that the worker be trained by a qualified trainer and possess the necessary skill and show competency to operate in a safe manner. Workers are required to inspect their machines prior to each use by completing a pre-trip inspection. Dependent on manufacturer's guidelines as well as WorkSafe BC regulations, fall protection must be worn at all times while in operation of the work platform. Mobile equipment. Much like elevating work platforms, a worker must possess the necessary skills to show competency as well as be trained by a qualified trainer in order to be able to work with mobile equipment. Operators are required to inspect their machines prior to each use by completing a pre-trip inspection. This will ensure the machine is in good working order and safe to start work. Controlled products. WMIS and SDS. Workers are required to follow all safety procedures and wear all necessary PPE that follows manufacturer's requirements and safety guidelines. ETRO requires submissions of safety data sheets prior to the use of any chemicals or controlled products on site. Asbestos, silica, and lead. While working around or with these hazardous items, appropriate means of containment and protection must be implemented to ensure the safety of all workers on site. Hierarchy of controls are usually used while dealing with these items to avoid exposure. The hierarchy of controls are elimination, substitution, engineering controls, administrative controls, and finally, PPE. Hot work. A hot work permit is required for any temporary operation involving open flames, heat production, or sparks. This includes, but is not limited to, brazing, cutting, grinding, soldering, thawing pipe, torch-applied roofing, and welding. Confined space and enclosed spaces. A confined space hazard assessment and a confined space entry permit must be completed by a qualified personnel prior to any entry. All workers involved in the scope of the work or assigned as part of the rescue team must be trained and sign off on all permits to ensure procedures and worker roles are established. These steps must be followed and completed prior to any entry to these types of spaces. Environmental protection. Due to city bylaw enforcement, it is essential that all toxic waste, chemicals, or materials be disposed in an appropriate manner. If there are any uncertainties regarding methods of disposing waste, please speak with an ETRO site supervisor for further direction. Musculoskeletal injuries. Examples of these injuries include strains, sprains, and muscle aches. Several ways to prevent these types of injuries include stretching, warming up your muscles, or periodically changing job tasks to alleviate continuous muscle strains due to repetitive work. Tickets, training, and certifications. Do you have any of the following tickets, training, or certificates? A valid first aid ticket, level 1, level 2, or level 3. WMIS training. Do you have a valid hearing test card? How to use a fire extinguisher. Fall protection training. Fall protection training certificate. Respiratory protection training. Respiratory fit test records. Please list any other specialized certificates you may have at the bottom of your worker orientation page. Once identified, please provide a copy of all applicable training certificates to an ETRO supervisor at the end of this orientation. The following points are to ensure that all workers understand their rights while at work. Understand that working safely is a condition of employment. Understand that you have the right and the responsibility to refuse unsafe work, the right to know, and the right to participate. Understand the importance of reporting medical conditions to first aid. Although optional, if you have any previous medical conditions, allergies, or are taking medications that might affect your well-being or work, please notify an ETRO supervisor as this information may help in the event of an emergency. At ETRO, we consider those around us, not only ourselves. It's thinking beyond fast actions and considering the big picture of how one's choice can have consequences for the entire team or the entire site. It's being a community steward and doing what's best for our projects and all individuals. It's also about slowing down, not cutting corners, and to do what's best, smartest, and safest. You have now completed the video component of your orientation. An ETRO supervisor will now continue.